She wasn't asking for special treatment, just a seat on a Blackhawk already headed north. But when she stepped forward with her duffel, the flight officer shook his head. Manifests closed. No exceptions. She stepped aside without a word. That's when a colonel glanced her way and stopped cold. Not because of her name, not because of her rank, but because of a patch barely visible on her sleeve. A mark from a unit that doesn't officially exist. He walked over, said 2 words, and just like that, the flight line shifted. Want to know what he said and why it mattered? Hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and immediately know you don't belong? That's what Camp Verdun felt like. If you weren't wearing the right patches or carrying the right orders. Forward staging post on the edge of Kuwait, where everything moved fast and nobody had time for questions they didn't want answered. The air tasted like aviation fuel and disappointment, with that particular blend of dust and diesel that sticks to your clothes for weeks after you leave. Helicopters sat like sleeping giants across the tarmac. Blackhawks, Apaches, a couple of Chinooks that looked like they'd seen better wars, the constant hum of generators mixed with the distant rumble of convoy trucks rolling in from patrol, creating that white noise soundtrack that every soldier knows by heart. Staff Sergeant Elena Ruiz stepped out from whatever shade she could find near the perimeter fence, duffel bag slung over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. Plain windbreaker, no unit insignia, no name tape, just standard fatigues and boots that had walked through more than their share of bad places. She moved with that careful precision that comes from years of being exactly where she needed to be when she needed to be there. Most people wouldn't have noticed the slight adjustment in her gait, the way she favored her left side just enough to compensate for something that hurt but couldn't be fixed. Old injury, old story. The kind of thing you learn to work around because the alternative is sitting on the sidelines, and some people just aren't built for benches. At the flight line, 2 MPs in fresh flak vests stood guard beside the hangar like they were protecting the crown jewels instead of a routine medical supply run. Behind them, a Blackhawk sat with its engine starting to warm up, that distinctive whine building toward the rhythmic chop that would soon slice through the desert air. Elena approached them the way she approached everything. Calm, direct, no wasted energy. Afternoon, Staff Sergeant Ruiz. I'm hoping to catch a seat north on the med run. I know I'm not on the manifest, but the first guard, barely old enough to legally drink, didn't even look up from his clipboard. Manifest's full. No walk-ons today. I understand that, but this is somewhat urgent. Someone specifically requested. The second guard cut her off with the kind of dismissive wave you give to street vendors. Orders are orders, ma'am. Bird's full. Next rotation's tomorrow, maybe. Elena took the rejection the way she took most things. Quietly, without argument. She nodded once, stepped back from the gate, and found herself a spot on a rusted fuel drum just outside the official hustle and bustle. The metal was hot enough to brand cattle, but she sat anyway, duffel at her feet, watching the organized chaos of military logistics with the patience of someone who'd waited in worse places for better reasons. Behind her, 2 soldiers in uniforms so crisp they practically crackled were having the kind of conversation that young troops have when they think they know how the world works. "Look at her," one of them said, voice carrying just enough to be heard over the engine noise. "Bet she's never been outside a TOC in her life." His buddy snorted. "Probably some admin type trying to tag along for the adventure. They all walk like that, like they've got a stick up their ass." Elena heard every word. Her grip on the duffel strap tightened just slightly, but her face remained perfectly neutral, because that's what decades of service teaches you, that reactions are choices, and some choices aren't worth making. The guards waved the 2 soldiers through without a second glance, their clean uniforms and confident swagger, apparently all the credentials they needed. Meanwhile, Elena sat in the heat, watching a helicopter that could save someone's life prepare to leave without her. Sometimes the only thing you can do is wait. So she waited. What they didn't know was why she was really there. The call had come through the night before on an encrypted line that technically didn't exist anymore. Crackling static, satellite delay, and a voice she'd trained personally back when she was still running combat medicine courses in the mountains. Staff Sergeant, it's Harrelson. Toby Harrelson. She'd remembered him immediately. Eager kid from Ohio, quick hands, quicker mind, the type who asked questions other students were afraid to voice. What's your status, Toby? Not good, ma'am. Took shrapnel in the leg during a sweep yesterday. Field medics did what they could, but his voice had gotten smaller. Ma'am, I'm scared. The doctors here are talking about complications, about things I don't understand. And I need someone who knows what they're doing. Elena had already been reaching for her gear before he finished talking. Are you asking for me specifically? Yes, ma'am, if that's possible. I know it's not official channels and I know you're not active anymore, but... Toby. Yes, ma'am. I'll be there. That was it. No paperwork, no official orders, no chain of command approval. Just a promise made in the dark to a soldier who needed someone who gave a damn. So now she sat on that burning fuel drum, watching her ride prepare to leave without her, because sometimes the right thing and the easy thing aren't even distant relatives. The morning had started differently. In a concrete barracks that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old coffee, Elena had packed with the same methodical precision she'd learned 20 years ago. Every item in its place, every space used efficiently. Her personal trauma kit went in first, the one she'd assembled herself over the years, not because the Army issue wasn't good enough, but because when someone's life is measured in seconds, you use what you know works. The prosthetic brace that wrapped around her left shin was part of her morning routine now, as automatic as brushing her teeth. She strapped it in place without ceremony, the way you put on a watch or lace up boots. The shrapnel that had torn through her leg outside Mosul 3 years ago had left her with a choice: accept the limitations or work around them. Elena had never been good at accepting limitations. From her duffel, she pulled out a coin, worn silver with a black phoenix etched into one side. No words, no unit designation, nothing that would mean anything to someone who hadn't earned the right to understand it. She slipped it into her boot the way other people carry lucky pennies, except this particular piece of metal represented something most people weren't supposed to know existed. Iron Nomad wasn't a person. It was a protocol. A program that officially never happened, run by people who officially were never there, handling situations that officially never needed handling. Medical support for operations so classified that the soldiers conducting them couldn't even tell their therapists about the nightmares afterward. Elena had been part of that world once, had carried that patch with pride and terror in equal measure, had walked into places where American soldiers were dying and their own medics couldn't reach them, either because of geography or politics, or the simple fact that officially those soldiers weren't supposed to be there in the first place. But that was before the injury, before the program got shut down, before she became just another veteran trying to figure out how to be useful in a world that didn't seem to need what she had to offer. Except sometimes late at night on encrypted channels, it still did. The flight line was getting busier now, crews running pre-flight checks with the urgent efficiency of people who'd done this dance more times than they could count. Elena watched from her perch as the Blackhawks rotors began their slow revolution, that distinctive whoop, 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 building toward takeoff power. Elena stood up slowly and approached the gate one more time. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying just enough authority to make the guards look up. "I know you said the manifest is full, but this really is urgent. Someone specifically requested my assistance with a medical situation up north." The second guard, the one who'd been particularly dismissive earlier, barely glanced at her. Ma'am, unless you've got orders signed by someone with a star on their collar, you're not getting on that bird. That's final. Elena nodded once, stepped back again, and that's when she did something that would change everything. She pulled off her windbreaker, ostensibly to deal with the heat, but really because she was tired of being invisible. The sleeve of her undershirt had a small Velcro patch on the inside, charcoal gray, barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. A black phoenix with a curved blade beneath it. No text, no unit designation, nothing that would show up in any official database. But if you knew what it meant everything. One of the helicopter crew chiefs, a grizzled staff sergeant, with grease under his fingernails and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much, caught a glimpse of the patch as he walked past. He stopped mid-stride, blinked twice, and looked again. For just a moment, his carefully maintained military bearing slipped, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like awe. But he said nothing. Just continued with his pre-flight duties, though Elena noticed he kept glancing back at her, with the kind of respect usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients and master sergeants who could kill you with their bare hands. That's when Colonel David Rourke stepped out of the command tent. You could feel the change in atmosphere before you even saw him. Conversations got quieter, postures got straighter, and the general chaos of military logistics suddenly acquired the focused precision that only comes when someone with real authority enters the picture. Rourke was the kind of colonel who'd earned his rank in places where mistakes got people killed, and it showed in everything from his measured stride to the way his eyes automatically cataloged threats and assets in whatever space he entered. Late 50s, built like someone who still did his own push-ups, with the kind of command presence that didn't need volume to be heard. He emerged from the tent with a steel thermos in one hand, already deep in conversation with his executive officer about supply schedules. And the new replacements from Region 5 will need confirmation before we can authorize wheels up, the XO was saying. Rourke was nodding absently, but Elena could tell he wasn't really listening anymore. His attention had shifted, locked onto something that had caught his trained eye. He'd seen the patch. He stopped walking so abruptly that his XO nearly collided with him. "Sir?" the younger officer asked, following his commander's gaze. Rourke didn't answer immediately. He was studying Elena with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. The way she stood, the way she scanned her surroundings, the careful economy of movement that spoke of training far beyond standard military basics. And then he saw it clearly. Just a glimpse as her windbreaker shifted. The patch that shouldn't exist on the uniform of someone who officially had never been there. "Jesus Christ," he said under his breath. But Rourke was already moving, changing direction with decisive authority. Each step toward Elena was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of understanding what that patch represented. Elena saw him coming and straightened slightly, not from nervousness, but from the ingrained respect one professional gives another. She didn't speak, just waited with the patience of someone accustomed to letting situations develop before committing to a course of action. Rourke stopped exactly 6 feet away, close enough for private conversation, but far enough to maintain proper military bearing. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of shared experience and hard-earned knowledge. Iron Nomad. 2 words, quiet enough that only she could hear them, but clear enough to cut through 20 years of officially sanctioned silence. For the first time since she'd arrived at Camp Verdun, Elena Ruiz smiled. Not a big smile, just the small expression of recognition that passes between people who've been to the same dark places. She said simply. Long time ago. Rourke's expression shifted, the professional mask giving way to something that looked like relief mixed with respect. "You're not on the manifest?" he asked. "No, sir." "Why not?" "I didn't ask to be. Just trying to get north. Someone needs help." That was enough. Rourke turned on his heel and marched directly toward the guards, his expression leaving no doubt that someone's day was about to get complicated. Whatever the colonel said next was too quiet for Elena to hear, but the effect was immediate. The airman's eyes went wide. He flipped through his clipboard with sudden urgency and began frantically erasing and rewriting names. Within minutes, one of the originally scheduled passengers was politely informed that his seat had been reassigned due to operational priority override. The crew chief jogged over to where Elena was sitting. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying respectful tone, "you're with us." Elena stood, shouldered her duffel with practiced ease, and began walking toward the helicopter. As she approached the loading ramp, she passed the two soldiers who'd been making jokes about her earlier. Their confident banter had evaporated. One of them leaned toward his buddy, voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "Who the hell is she?" The other shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, but did you see how fast the colonel moved her onto that bird?" Elena reached the ramp where Colonel Rourke was waiting. When she stopped in front of him, he did something that surprised everyone watching. He saluted. Not casual acknowledgement, but the deep, respectful salute reserved for people who've earned it in places where earning it might cost you everything. Elena hesitated for just a moment, then returned the salute with crisp precision. Then she climbed the ramp and disappeared into the dim interior of the Black Hawk. Rourke watched her vanish into the helicopter. When his XO finally worked up the courage to ask the obvious question, the colonel's answer was characteristically understated. "Sir, should I log this under tactical priority or administrative override?" Rourke didn't look away from the helicopter as the engine spun up to full power. "Log it under necessity," he said simply. "Sometimes the right person needs to be in the right place, regardless of what the paperwork says." Inside the Black Hawk, the familiar sensations of pre-flight settled around Elena like an old coat. The metallic vibration through the floor, the hydraulic hiss of systems coming online, the peculiar pressure that builds in your ears just before takeoff. She'd been in more helicopters than she could count, in more places than most people could pronounce, and the routine was as comforting as it was functional. She stowed her duffel beneath her seat with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this dance more times than she cared to remember, then settled into the webbing harness that would keep her in place during what was likely to be a rough flight. Her eyes automatically scanned the interior, emergency exits, first aid equipment, anything that might be useful if things went sideways. Across from her, a young corpsman, maybe half her age, was trying not to stare at the faded patch visible through her partly unzipped windbreaker. He'd probably heard stories about Iron Nomad, the kind of half-whispered legends that circulate through military medical corps like ghost stories. Stories about medics who went places regular medics couldn't go, who saved people regular medics couldn't reach, who operated under protocols that officially didn't exist. He didn't ask questions. Smart kid. The seat next to Elena remained conspicuously empty. Not because there wasn't anyone else who could sit there, but because word had already spread through the small passenger compartment about who she was, or at least who she might be. In the military, sometimes reputation travels faster than facts, and sometimes that's enough. Near the cockpit, a radio operator leaned toward the young medic who'd been staring. "That patch on her sleeve," he whispered. "You know what that is?" The medic shook his head. "Iron Nomad, special medical protocol. They handled situations too sensitive for regular channels." "I thought that was just stories." "Maybe it was," the radio operator said, glancing toward Elena with something approaching awe. "But she's wearing the patch." Elena closed her eyes and let the familiar rhythm of rotor wash settle into her bones. She wasn't thinking about patches or protocols. She was thinking about a young soldier named Toby Harrelson, lying in a field hospital with shrapnel in his leg and fear in his eyes. The pilot's voice crackled through the internal communications. "All passengers secure. Lifting in 30 seconds. About halfway through the flight, the young corpsman finally worked up the courage to speak. "Ma'am, you're medical too, right?" Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. "Yes." "Is that what they taught you in Iron Nomad?" The question hung in the air. The other passengers suddenly got very interested in their boots or the ceiling. She looked at the young medic for a long moment. "They didn't teach us anything in Iron Nomad," she said quietly. "Because Iron Nomad didn't exist. What we learned by doing." "But the patch is a reminder," Elena said, her voice carrying just enough edge to end the conversation. "Sometimes that's all you need." Elena found Sergeant Toby Harrelson exactly where she'd expected to, in the overflow area behind the main medical tent, lying on a cot beneath camouflaged netting that provided shade but no privacy. His left leg was wrapped in field dressings that had already soaked through with blood, and his face had the grayish pallor that came from pain and shock and trying to be tougher than human beings were designed to be. When he saw her approaching, his eyes widened like he wasn't sure she was real. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked with relief. Elena knelt beside his cot without ceremony, already reaching for his chart and checking his vitals with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this assessment more times than she could count. His pulse was too fast, his breathing was shallow, and the fresh blood seeping through the bandages told her that whoever had treated him initially had done good work under bad circumstances, but it wasn't going to be enough. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Toby whispered. Elena looked him in the eye with direct, no bullshit honesty. "We don't leave our own," she said simply. From behind her, one of the station medics approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, I don't think we've been introduced. Elena didn't look up from her examination of Toby's leg. "I need saline, fresh gauze, a thermal blanket, and someone to tell me exactly what kind of shrapnel we're dealing with here." The medic blinked, clearly not used to being interrupted or given orders by someone he didn't recognize. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I need to see some credentials before..." Elena finally looked up, and something in her eyes made the young medic take a step back. "Son," she said quietly, "that boy has been bleeding for 18 hours while you people figure out paperwork. You can check my credentials later. Right now, you can either help me save his leg, or you can explain to his mother why you let bureaucracy get in the way of medical care." The medic looked at Toby, then back at Elena, then at the blood-soaked bandages that were clearly beyond his ability to handle properly. "What do you need?" he asked. For the next hour, Elena worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that time was the enemy and precision was the only weapon that mattered. She cleaned and redressed the wound, stopped the bleeding that had been slowly draining Toby's strength, and administered pain medication with the careful calculation of someone who knew exactly how much was enough without being too much. She didn't talk much while she worked, just the occasional quiet instruction to the medics who'd gathered to watch and learn. Her hands moved with the sure confidence of someone who'd done this work in conditions far worse than a properly equipped aid station, and gradually, Toby's color improved, his breathing steadied, and the tension that had been holding him rigid began to ease. When she finally sat back and pulled off her gloves, Toby was sleeping peacefully for the first time since he'd been wounded. Not the restless unconsciousness of shock and pain, but the deep, healing sleep of someone whose body finally believed it was safe. Elena stood slowly, working the kinks out of her back, and found herself surrounded by a small crowd of medical personnel who'd been drawn by the word that someone with Iron Nomad credentials was working on the tough case they'd been struggling with. "How did you know to..." one of them began. "Experience," Elena said simply, "and caring more about the patient than the procedure." Just then, the sound of another helicopter approaching cut through the afternoon air. This one was larger, heavier, with the distinctive sound signature of a command bird, rather than a simple transport. Elena didn't need to look to know that someone important was arriving. The way the camp personnel suddenly got busier, the way conversations got quieter, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that always preceded the arrival of serious authority. She also didn't need to look to know that her time here was running out. She'd done what she came to do, and now the official channels would take over. with their proper procedures and documented protocols and carefully maintained separation between what was officially acknowledged and what had actually happened, Colonel Rourke stepped off the command helicopter with the same measured authority he displayed back at Camp Verdun. But this time, his attention was focused entirely on finding Elena. He spotted her near the medical tents and approached with the respectful bearing of someone who understood exactly what he was witnessing. He didn't ask questions about her credentials or her authority to be there. He just nodded once, a gesture of recognition between professionals who understood that sometimes the right person in the right place was worth more than all the paperwork in the world. "How is he?" Rourke asked, glancing toward where Toby was sleeping peacefully. "He'll be fine," Elena said. "They just needed someone with experience in field trauma to put the pieces together. And you just happened to be available." Elena almost smiled. "I'm always available for my people, Colonel. That's what the patch means." "I thought Iron Nomad was disbanded." "Officially," Elena said, "but caring about soldiers who need help isn't something you can disband with paperwork. It's something you carry with you." 20 minutes later, she was back on a Blackhawk heading south, her duffel once again stowed beneath her seat, her mission complete. The other passengers on this flight were different. Evacuation cases, personnel rotations, the normal traffic of a military operation that never stopped moving. But the young corpsman from her earlier flight was there too. And this time, when he looked at her, it was with the kind of respect that comes from watching someone do something extraordinary and making it look routine. "Ma'am," he said as they lifted off, "what you did back there, is that what Iron Nomad really was?" Elena looked out the window at the desert passing below them. Endless stretches of nothing, broken by the occasional reminder that people lived and worked and sometimes died in places most of the world would never see. "Iron Nomad was whatever it needed to be," she said quietly. "Sometimes that meant going places other people couldn't go. Sometimes it meant doing things other people couldn't do. But mostly it meant showing up when someone needed you to show up." The corpsman thought about that for a while. "Do you miss it?" Elena was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. But finally, she turned from the window and looked at him with something that might have been sadness or might have been pride. "Son," she said, "it never stopped. It just got quieter." The helicopter flew on through the desert heat, carrying with it a woman who'd never officially existed, returning from a mission that would never appear in any after-action report, having saved a life that would never know how close it had come to being lost. Sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows, done by people whose names will never appear in headlines or history books. Sometimes heroism is as simple as showing up when someone needs you, regardless of what the paperwork says or what the official channels allow. Sometimes the patch you wear isn't about the recognition you receive. It's about the promises you keep when no one's watching. Have you ever been dismissed because someone couldn't see past what was on the surface? Do you think quiet service still matters in a world that seems to value noise over substance? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another one. Share this with someone who believes that real heroes don't need recognition. They just need the opportunity to help. More stories are waiting for you right here on screen, and we'll see you next time. Same place, same mission, because some stories deserve to be told, even if they were never supposed to happen.